Greetings and welcome. It's nice to have you here. Jonathan Foust here. Welcome to this short guided meditation and talk. Last week we explored working with fear, and guess what's up this time? More on fear, more of the strategies for transforming fear into wisdom. But before we begin, some thank yous. A big thank you to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo, our producers that make this possible. A big thank you to our Mindful Movement leader, to Rita Moran, and to Mindful Dialogue leader, Ray Manioki. The whole Monday night experience. 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can enjoy Mindful Movement guided by Rita. It brings you here at 7:30 Eastern Standard. And after this talk, you can join with Ray Manioki with Mindful Dialogue. Just an opportunity to informally connect with others, guided by a kind and wise soul in Ray. Those links are on my Facebook page and on my website. I got a mailing list. If you'd like to join, I send a compendium of my talks and resources and my photography from the last month or so. And as well, thank you for your support. This is all offered in the classic offering of dana. No one is to be denied access to these practices and teachings, therefore there is no charge. And if you feel inspired to help keep this rolling along, many, many thanks. Again, my website, Facebook page, you can follow up there. So with that, let's move into our practice. And we're going to explore a little bit around finding that place where you can be the observer, that quality of the witness. And from this place, you can deepen your investigation into the nature of reality itself. So you might let your body sway or move or adjust in any way that feels good, any way that feels right for you. As you're ready, you can close your eyes. And let your attention become aware of your breathing. Notice where you feel the breath on the inside right now. I'd like to offer a slightly different technique as part of this meditation. It's gentle, but it can be quite profound. On the next inhalation, very gently inhale, hold the breath for a moment. And as you exhale, let the breath just fall out of the body and notice what could soften or relax. To amplify this, you might breathe in through the nose, hold the breath, and open the mouth slightly, or you can purse the lips and exhale through an open mouth. Slow, full inhalation filling the lungs. Exhale through the open mouth, just a falling away of the breath. Doing 3 more rounds. Inhale, coming fully present. Exhale, what could relax, what could soften, what could let go right now. Smooth breath in, falling away on the out-breath. Softening, relaxing, and feeling. And now, if you like, releasing all control of the breath. And just feel the breath unrestricted, free-flowing, easy, effortless. And you might sense now how you could relax or soften around the breath. Softening the belly. Feel the weight of the arms. Feel the space inside the palms. Soles of the feet and the heels. Is it possible to feel the micro muscles of your face relaxing? Your face becoming completely expressionless. Softening the muscles around the eyes. The forehead smooth. Relaxing the tongue. What could relax inside right now? And what could relax even more? You might imagine now what it's like to take the seat of the witness, this inner state of observing without judgment, and direct your attention to the breath or to sound or the feeling in the palms. And for these next few minutes, guiding your attention to the experience on the inside of this breath, of these sound vibrations, to the felt sense in the palms of the hands. Deeply relaxed, at the same time alert to the aliveness right here, right now. The mind secretes thoughts like an organ secretes fluids. There is no condemnation of thinking. It's utterly natural. But every time you notice your mind lost in thought, every time you let go and re-arrive, you reinforce, you strengthen the sense of non-judging awareness. Who you are as the one who is aware. You may find it helpful to narrow your attention directly to your anchor, to cultivate that quality of relaxed concentration and calming. Or you might like to direct your attention to the sense of foreground and background. The breath or sound or feeling in the foreground, in the background, sensitizing yourself to all that is changing, to the stream or the flow of things. Everything streaming in the realm of feeling, of sounds, of the felt sense, the air, the breath. To the stream of commentary, of the mind generating thoughts. To the stream of mood and feeling and emotion. and even different states of mind, all coming and going like weather systems. Is it possible to relax, to watch, and to let things be? You may notice there is an element of doing, an element of effort in this practice. When the mind is at sea, bringing it back home. And you may notice there's also a quality of allowing. Is it possible to feel both this quality of engagement and rest in the present moment? Noticing this quality of being the open monitor, awake to change. And you might explore now, in this remaining minute, turning your attention to this quality of deeply resting in the here and now. In the absence of doing, in the absence of effort, what do you feel on the inside? What changes all by itself? What do you notice? Releasing all technique. What could relax or soften right now? What could relax or soften even more than that? With your eyes closed, you might just note the sounds around you, the space around you right now. Sensing anything that may have shifted, the quality of presence right now. And you might very gently let your eyes open and let your body move and shift in any way that feels good. Take your time in this transition. There's no hurry, no rush. You might like to reach your arms up overhead, stretch up in any way that feels good. How does your body want to move? Take the next few moments for whatever feels right. And welcome back. And welcome back. Last week I talked a little bit around kind of the art of transforming fear into wisdom. I told the story of Ajahn Chah, who meditated in the charnel grounds with corpses burning around him, who somehow found a way to turn and investigate the fear and found himself really getting to the root of his fear. I also shared a little bit about my lifelong antipathy toward snakes and so many of my experiences and how I was able to kind of transform that. And I wanted to share a little bit with you now around kind of the nuts and bolts of working with anxiety and fear when it arises. I had mentioned something that U Tejaniya had said. And U Tejaniya is a kind of a wonderful mindfulness teacher. He said that the worst thing you can possibly do is to think, how can I get rid of this? Because the desire not to have anything bad happen at all is exactly what causes the worst fears to arise. The mind that doesn't want any sorrow or suffering creates the most anxiety. And of course, I don't know about you, but when fear arises for me, I automatically want to nuke it. I want to make it go away. But the question becomes, what is the art of working with fear and anxiety when it arises? I've had the opportunity to work with people over the course of my life, and many, of course, who are dealing with fear and anxiety. And the question becomes that when you feel fear arising, it's just helpful to put this in the context of essential mindfulness, which of course is summed up beautifully in the practice of RAIN, R-A-I-N. Recognize, realize it's there. And here, naming it can be so powerful. When you can name, I'm feeling fear. Just the naming of it, you have severed your identification with it just a little bit. The second element, once you've recognized it, is to ask, can I be with it? And here I always find it's so important to slow down and sincerely ask that question. Can I be with it? Can I allow it? And the most reliable place to direct that question is somatically to the body. The body doesn't lie. And I am so surprised in my own investigation and when I'm working with other people, when I ask something really, really big, can you be with it? Just asking the question creates a little more space. And sometimes there is a sense of like, a little bit. I can be with it a little bit. And sometimes it sort of opens up the gate to be with it. And of course, when you have a sense of, okay, I can be with it, or I'm willing to be with it, this opens up this essential element of insight meditation or vipassana, which is the act of investigation of what's arising. The act of investigation, as I mentioned before, has to do with your biography, the story, the causes, the conditions. But it also has to do with your biology, exploring how this fear lives in your nervous system, finding its location, really getting into the experience of it. This, of course, goes on to the end part of this equation of nurturing what you find. This is calling on empathy, compassion, kindness, loving presence. We need to figure out our own wiring as to how to do that. But as teacher Sokni Rinpoche said, that nurturing, that loving presence, it's the lubrication that allows you to let something go. So the question becomes, how do you access that place where you can be present to fear and anxiety? And of course, finding that place is critical. Otherwise, we're simply reacting. We're in a reaction phase. To move out of conditioning, we have to shift our consciousness in some way. As Einstein said, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. So shifting your state, super important. When I feel fear, and I feel anxiety, my natural reaction is to make it go away. Just to make it want to go away, which paradoxically feeds the fire. Turning to face and be with and have tea with fear is one of the most deeply transformative practices that you can do. I just have to share this story because it's a classic teaching story and it sums it all up. Chances are you've heard this one multiple times, but it's the story of the yogini meditating in her cave, deep, deep in meditation. 3 demons come into the cave. They're whirling around. Horrible, horrible stuff. She gets up. She starts building a little fire. She's so non-reactive that it ticks the demons off and they crank it up. Horrible images and sounds, terrible stuff. And she puts the tea kettle on over the fire, and this enrages the demons. They got everything. They give her everything they got. She's putting out teacups. They stop, and they say, "We're your 3 deepest wounds, your 3 worst nightmares. And here you are, building this fire, putting on the tea kettle, putting out these cups. What's going on?" And she says, "Well, you've been here before, and you'll be here again. So in the meantime, what kind of tea would you like?" To me, that summarizes the path. Having tea with your demons. And there's so much to share about the art of this. But those demons are scary. They're terrifying. And I'm certainly aware myself of the trauma response when fear arises, of lashing out in wild anger, or being paralyzed by fear, or just disassociating. So navigating fear requires a lot of skillful means. And for many of us, it's really helpful to be supported. But there may be times in your practice when you're meditating or going along merrily in your life and you begin to feel that clench arise. And you can begin to sense your capacity to name it. You might get an inner somatic sense that you can be with it. And what I find in my own practice is it possible to move from the story to where it lives on the inside? How does this live in my nervous system? A lot of times I find that my anxiety, it doesn't really even have a name. I've noticed for myself that it's like a low-grade fever. There's just low-grade anxiety. And what I've really found, and one of the things I really want to share here, is that you don't necessarily even have to have a story to access it. We tend to feel all through the midline, around the eyes, the throat, the heart, the belly, deep in the guts. That's where we tend to feel emotion the most. And when you feel that kind of like polyvagal response, you'll feel that deep, deep clench way down deep. And the question becomes, from what place can you observe it? I shared last time how sometimes doing really conscious breathing, I shared about box breathing, breathing in 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold out for 4, breathe in to the count of 4, hold for 4, exhale, hold the breath out. How this is the go-to technique for snipers. You're surrounded by chaos and you need to bring that presence. Sometimes I find that technique is really, really helpful. Quite often, the softer approach is to sense, where don't I feel it? And can I establish my attention somewhere where I don't feel it? As I've shared many, many times at the dentist, my go-to place, my hands. I may be freaked out about what's happening in my mouth, but wow, if I keep my attention in my hands, I can bear this. I can come back and my whole system will re-relax. So I'm expressly not going into an inquiry right now because I'd like to talk a little bit more about the turning toward. As I told the story of Ajahn Chah, and if you missed the last talk, he was meditating in charnel grounds, the burning ghats. They're cremating bodies, and he was doing the classic meditation of reflecting on the decay of the body, on impermanence, and he felt this presence that just terrified him. And he found a way to stay present to the fear, to sit with the fear, to get familiar with the fear. And he asked himself, what exactly am I afraid of? And the word that came to him was death. I'm afraid of dying. And he turned to investigate that. And he began to reflect on the nature of death. That even if he ran, he would die. And that death was within him, and he felt a profound shift. So what are the essential elements of fear when you feel something? One approach I found really helpful says that there are 3 essential fears. I don't know if it's true ultimately, but it's a very interesting thing to explore. One fear is the fear of death. It's a little more subtle than just a fear of losing your life. It's also losing your identity. Obviously, we're attached to our bodies, but we're also attached to our story. And when there is like a true death of your story, like someone who's head of an organization who's suddenly fired, you have a job that's really important, suddenly you're fired. That is a death. That's a death of the self. A more common fear that arises is the fear of losing control. We have this manager inside that is working really, really hard to make sure everything is in its place. And the fear of losing control has a very profound life inside. The third is the fear of losing attention, affection, and love. The fear of losing connection. And this one is interesting because it's really tied into something core. As early humans, we had to be part of a tribe to survive. And being excommunicated, being cut off, meant death. So that sense of attention, affection, and love, losing that, again, brings us back to a primal sense of fear. So I have found in the past, sometimes, not all the time, but this becomes a very skillful form of inquiry. When I can recognize a fear, when I can begin to bring my attention to investigate it when it feels okay, to ask myself, are the roots of this fear around death, losing my life, losing my ego identity? Is the fear here around the fear of losing control? Or the fear of losing attention, affection, and love? Sometimes it feels like it's all 3, but sometimes I can begin to sense, oh, you know what? There's something here about the fear of losing control. Like, what am I going to do next? And so the panic, and just by naming it, again, you name it, you begin to recognize it. And sometimes there's just a sense of like, oh, that's what this is about. So there's a very interesting process. And let's just we'll take a couple minutes just to kind of pop into it as a little investigation. And I'll kind of like walk you through this, but then it brings in a very interesting question. And this comes from a tradition of slipping my mind right. Oh, the Sedona Method. Fascinating story behind it. Fascinating story. But you might find this little inquiry to be helpful. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow, deep breaths right now. And can you soften on the out breath? And can you just bring yourself into the here and now? And you might want to bring your attention to something in your life that has some element of anxiety, perhaps some element of fear, and just encourage you as you kind of go through the files to find something that's got a charge, but not too much of a charge, just so you can get a sense of how these questions might be helpful. And when you've settled on an issue in your life, it might take a few more moments. Just an issue where you feel some anxiety, some fear. You might take a moment to draw it a little closer. For some of us, if you're visual, can you recreate a visual sense of this? A still image, a moving image? How clearly can you see it? For some of us, this is really helpful to bring it into sharper focus. You might like to bring in the auditory elements. Are there words? Are there sounds? And now inviting in a sense of the kinesthetic. When you think about this, is there a felt sense? Is there a sense of how your body holds this? Of how this lives in the nervous system? And again, you might sense the eyes, the throat, the heart, the belly. A few questions. Is it okay to be with this? Is it okay to investigate this? Listen to your body. What does your body say? If it's no, turn your attention elsewhere. Choose another topic. If you have a sense of okay, you can just sort of stay with it for a few moments. As you think about this, how this lives on the inside, you might sense, only if it feels okay, what is this fear like at its worst? And again, could you describe it in a word or two to someone if they were listening? Can you be with it like you're sharing a park bench together? And when you sense into the nature of this fear, is there a sense of what this fear is all about? Is this fear tied into a fear of death? Is there a sense that your physical life is under threat? Or perhaps a sense of your identity, who you are, is under threat? Is there a sense that this fear is tied into the fear of losing control, of not knowing what's next, a groundlessness perhaps? Is there a sense that this fear is connected in some way to the fear of losing attention, affection, or love, of being cut off in some way? And if you have a sense that it's one of these, or maybe a combination of these, you might take a few moments to again sense, can you be with this? Can you make room for this? Can you locate what it feels like inside? And here are 3 questions to explore. Can you let it be, Or can you let it go right now? If you could let it be, or you could let it go, would you? And is there a sense of when you would let it go? When it would be okay to let it go? If you like, you can deepen your breath. You can open your eyes. You might sense if anything shifted. One thing I'd like to point out is that quite often when you look at fear, it's not necessarily all tied up in a neat bow with a really clear little insight all packaged. But I think I can guarantee you this. By streaming sincere attention to looking at a fear to get familiar with it, you may find that something may have shifted here in your relationship with it. It may not be now, but something down the road may arise. Just the willingness to be with it, the willingness to look deeper. How fear can be tied into truly either physical death or the death of ego, the death of your story. That existential fear of losing control, of being cut off. Naming those can be helpful. And I love those 3 questions. Could I be with it? Could I let it go right now? And the second question, if I could, would I? And the third, when would I be able to? Each of those questions directs your attention either consciously or unconsciously toward the possibility of letting go. My particular life specialty is anxiety. I've talked about this before, but the child before me died in childbirth. My mother was extremely anxious when she was carrying me, so I can lay claim to the fact that I was spawned in this amniotic sac of anxiety. So I know it well. And one of the most helpful things I've run across is an exploration through, not so much through biology, but more through biography. It's more of a cognitive approach. And it's beautifully said, probably better than I could say, in a TED Talk by Tim Ferris called Fear Planning. And it's a beautiful story. I will include the link below because it's succinct and it'll give you a real sense of how it works. But I want to give a shout out to it here. Because again, many of us are subject to low-grade anxiety. It doesn't have a name. It's just anxiety waiting to happen, fear waiting to happen. Kind of that hypervigilant, it's not okay quality of awareness. And his experience was really inspired by the Stoics. And Stoicism is a reality-based practice, not unlike exploring through Buddhist psychology and Buddhist practices. They are reality-based. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's about reality. And so the question here, there are 3 questions that you ask yourself. When you feel fear arising, again, the last thing we want to do is turn toward it, but when you can name it, you can ask yourself, what might happen? And this is really helpful to do journaling. What if my fears were realized? Write that down. What I find is just writing it down, again, sort of severs my identification with those thoughts that that are just landing like moths. They're there and they're gone, they're there and they're gone. Writing it down kind of crystallizes it, which is really, really helpful. And then you ask yourself, well, what could I do to avoid this? And then just like creating a laundry list, you just brainstorm all the ways you could avoid it or prevent it. And then, because this is a reality-based practice, the third question is, what can I do to correct it if it happens? So, just an example. Recently, I was someone who was in a very rocky relationship, very, very tenuous relationship. And her fear was this relationship might be over. And when I think about this relationship being over, I'm filled with dread. My system starts to shut down and I just feel paralyzed. So her response is just into freeze, just absolutely frozen. So I asked her, well, what could happen? What's the worst that could happen? And she said, well, it's obvious. He could decide he's done and he wants to move on. The next question, what could you do to prevent this? And it was very interesting because what happens is when we're identified with fear, we're so overwhelmed with it as a reality that when I asked that question, what could you do to prevent this? It was almost like a little bit of a shudder. And she said, well, I could get some help. She said, maybe I could find some ways that I could be happier right now, just the way it is. She said, maybe he'd be willing to get some help and really, so I can find out what's not working for him and look closer at how I might be part of this. I haven't really been willing to do that. And she went on, she said, well, we haven't had any fun. Maybe we could have some fun together. It's been so grim. And then she said, wow, there's a lot I can do. I didn't even realize this. And you could feel just the whole energy kind of lifted for her. So that question kind of gave her a sense of hope. But again, this is a reality-based practice. So I went on, I asked her, well, what could you do if this happens? What could you do to correct it? What could you do to find inner balance? And again, just the question kind of like re-triggered her. But she said, you mean if it's really over? And long pause, and she said, well, I can call in my posse. I've got friends, and I've actually pushed a lot of them away, but I could invite them back, and create my inner circle, create my lifeboat. She said, I could actually make this a new chapter and take some time to step away and find out what's really important. She says, I've always wanted to just take some time in nature with really, really good friends. I've been starving for that because it's something my partner isn't into at all. And she said, well, I want to make sure our finances were figured out so I wouldn't be caught with anxiety. And she went on to kind of name other things that she could do. And then again, a long pause. And she said, I'll be okay. I was so touched to go from a sense of paralysis to saying, you know what, I'll be okay. How did that arc happen? Again, reality-based. And fortunately, she was in a place where she could investigate her fear without being re-traumatized. That's really important. But turning to look at the reality, what's the worst that could happen? And if you remember the talk ago about Ajahn Chah, who was meditating in the charnel grounds, surrounded by cremations, when he felt that fear, what's the worst that could happen? Death. Now, I think it all comes down to that ultimately. But really asking yourself, what's the worst could happen? There's something about naming it, turning toward it, that can create a little more space. And then to look at the reality of what you could do to prevent it. And always for me, I realized I have so many more options than I thought I had because I was so identified with the fear. And then if it were to happen, what can you do to correct it? What can you do to create balance? Again, for me, reinforces I have options. Because when I'm in fear, I'm closed down. When I'm not in fear, or I'm temporarily suspended from fear, I can begin to reconnect again. I have access to my intuition. I have access to my creativity. So I hope you found that. I hope you found that inquiry helpful. And again, it's so important to remember that fear lives in the mind and it lives in the body. Your biography are your thoughts, your beliefs, all of your conditioning, all the interpretations you've had of everything that could kill you, and all of your strategies for avoiding it. And exploring that cognitively can be very, very helpful. And one of the main explorations is that investigation of what's the worst that could happen, what can you do to avoid it, what could you do to correct it if it happened. Another one is to explore, what am I believing? That's a whole other topic. But again, when we put this in the context of RAIN, R-A-I-N, to recognize a fear or anxiety, the sense of you can be with it, if you can allow it. If you have that kinesthetic sense that it's okay, feel it in the biology, feel it in the nervous system. There are a number of questions you can ask. But one of the interesting questions is to ask, what am I believing about this? Again, it's somewhat tied into the 3 core fears. But if you can be with it, and it's challenging here because it can become a very intellectual process when you kind of have to dig, like, what's the core operative belief here? Quite often it's, I'm not okay. There's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable. And when you can really identify that question, again, this is referencing Byron Katie's work, which is beautiful. Questions you can ask yourself is, what is the core belief? The second question you can ask yourself, is it true? Do I know that to be true? And the first response is usually yes, because I'm thinking it has to be true. But to really sit with it, do I know that to be true? Get that little crack in the wall, and then ask yourself, who am I without this thought? Sometimes there can be a beautiful release all through the nervous system when you realize how wherever that thought came from, it was installed into the hard drive when you didn't have any virus protection. But of course, in this investigation, it's really helpful to include your biology, how fear lives on the inside. There's a prayer in the ashram that we would do every night. And the prayer was, guide me from darkness to light, from the known to the unknown. And the unknown are all the subterranean fears, everything unseen, unfelt, undigested, are all part of this investigation. So there's an element here I wanted to touch on before we close. I had shared this before, but as my mother was in her dying process, her passing was not easy. It was not comfortable at all. Part of it had to do with her brain kind of falling apart. So it was not only dementia, there was also lots of very powerful delusions and lots of acting out. And I found myself fearful because I was fearful of how to be with her, how to support her, because when she would move into her delusional states, they were very real to her, but they were obviously completely separated from the reality that the rest of us were living in. And I didn't know whether it was better to reinforce her delusions or try to correct them. It was pretty scary. Back to U Tejaniya, who speaks on fear. He said this. He said, for me, the key is that anyone, can accept in their mind that fear or anxiety is natural, that it can happen, and it's happening now. If the mind accepts this, that's just the nature of mind at work. The acceptance settles the mind so much. So as I'm trying to be present for my mother, who was basically like narrating this dreamscape of fragments of thoughts, coming together, I was afraid for her. I was afraid for myself. When I really reflected, like, what is the fear? Is it tied into death? Is it tied into loss of control? Is it tied into losing attention, affection, and love? Is like, well, it's kind of a combination of them all. Seeing her in her dying process as a reflection of my own dying process, my own fear of losing my mind as I'd watched her losing her mind, that resonating with that fear of losing control, of feeling cut off. Naming it was so helpful. And then I remembered a phrase, which I had heard before, but sometimes they just come in at the right time. And the phrase is wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. And I just thought about that, and I thought, this is real. This is happening. Is it possible to practice wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with what is happening? And something completely shifted for me. Instead of holding back and being in self-protection, I was able to lean in. I was able to lean in and find a way to be with her. And I actually found that as she was speaking that wasn't making any sense, I just reflected her words back to her. And she would say, I'm gonna go talk to my mother. And I would just say, so you're gonna go talk to your mother. And then the next fragment would come in and I would reflect that back. And I don't really know if it was helpful, but on some level, it was offering this mirror for her, just a mirror of her presence, of letting her know that I was there, that I was sharing that space with her. I was also able to lean in and get curious about what was happening to her, what was happening in her brain, what was happening in her health. I was able to find a way to stay curious. So I hope that phrase might be helpful. Wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality. And it kind of brings me to perhaps the greatest fear. And this is referencing someone who had sat with the dying for many, many, many years, thousands and thousands of people sitting with them. And she said the number one fear or the number one regret of the dying is this: I wasn't true to myself. So perhaps we can just take a few moments and we'll explore a little meditation around this for our close. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might slow down the breath. And as you breathe, I'd like to offer a few questions. As you sense the trajectory of your life, that which is falling away, that which is calling you forward, how have you not been true to yourself? And when you explore that question, what felt sense forms inside? What do you feel? What do you notice? And now you might imagine, if you like, at the end of this life journey, looking back over the expanse of your life and feeling that you lived a life where you were true to yourself. What do you feel? What do you notice inside? In these final moments, you might just inquire, what could relax inside right now? What could relax even more? And can you imagine, as you journey through this life, that as fear arises, you might recognize it as a teacher with an offering. Your capacity to be with it, to investigate it, to have tea with your fears is doorway after doorway after doorway, opening you into a deeper sense of presence, a deeper sense of truth, a more infinite sense of possibility in your life. In these final moments, you might, in your own way, wish yourself well. Imagine your life guided with a greater sense of ease, of well-being, opening into a more full and rich expression of your heart, of your creativity, and of possibility. And in these final moments, wishing all beings well. May all beings feel inner peace. May all beings have access to joy, to compassion, and to possibility. As you're ready, you can gently deepen the breath. You can open your eyes if they're not open already. Thank you so much for your time and attention. There's something so powerful about turning toward what we feel is holding us back to look at the reality of it, and to open again and again to this sense of enthusiastic, wholehearted cooperation with reality. Best wishes to you. Thank you again.